All right, everybody. I am excited to begin our first panel of the day. This is on crafting immersive journeys, experience design in the audiovisual realm. Super excited to talk to our panelists about this, so I'm going to go ahead and bring them on. Please give a warm welcome to Jackie Walker, Marcus Terenzio, and David Title. Hi, guys. Welcome.
Thanks,
All right,
Steph.
stuff.
So I wanted to, before I just dive in and start just, asking a million questions of you guys, I would love if you guys could just go around, introduce yourselves, and talk a little bit about what you do. Jackie, do you want to start?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Jackie Walker. I am the retail experience strategy lead at Publicis Sapient, cover all of North America. And I work across multiple verticals, most notably retail and quick serve restaurants. Excited to be
Awesome.
here today.
Very cool. Marcus, what about you?
I'm Marco Strenzio. I'm the Senior Director of Digital Experience at IA Interior Architects, and we're a global architecture and experience design firm working across retail, workplace, hospitality vectors. Have a long history in branding, creative, experiential design, and always been focused in digital within physical environments.
Very cool. And David, what about you?
David Title. I'm a partner here at Bravo Media, and we are an experiential production company that works with brands and agencies and organizations to develop and produce cool, new, innovative experiences and displays and that kind of stuff.
Awesome. So for our audience members, if at any point during this panel you have questions that you would like me to ask any of our panelists, go ahead and put those in the Q&A next to us, and I will pepper those in along with my own questions. So to get us started, I would love to just throw this out to the entire panel. So let's talk about how can a user-centric approach influence the design of immersive experiences? Just kind of a wide net of a question, if you will. So that's for whoever wants to go first.
Oh, I'll jump in. User-centric's a funny word because I don't know how you design without the user, but I do think one of the, we work across a lot of different kinds of events and in a lot of different environments. And even though an individual can be the same person across a lot of different times and places, how they're going to behave or want to behave or what they'll respond to is going to be different in, a museum setting versus a retail setting versus a music festival versus and so when we think about the user and being user centric, a lot of what we think about is not just the user but the world that we're encountering that person um, to help inform that first step of experience design. Because there are things I would happily do in a museum that I'm just not going to do in the middle of a store. And I see examples of that misplace kind of often.
Yeah, and I can piggyback off some of that. So, I mean, specifically at IA, we have one source of truth when we design our experiences, and we use the lens of harmony. So we always look to see how we can harmonize people to place. And that's really guided by research-driven understanding of human behavior across a bit of a global context. So we use a lens of looking at it from four aspects. So if you think of harmony in the middle, usually I have a cool bubble diagram to show when I'm saying this, but and if you surrounded that with obviously being client-driven and focused and being cognizant of whatever that brand culture or mission might be, we like to look at it from the lens of spatial, relational, and experiential, and how all those facets can come together. So something that drives our experiences is, we need to realize that our experiences might need to provide coherence, to be able to provide, that kind of mental and physical empowerment, fascination, because I mean, you want to be able to provide enriching experiences that are going to be meaningful. And belonging is something that's very important to make sure that it's welcoming and belonging. And that's important to have because we know that people are going to come with their own varying levels of attention, their own perceptions on what they feel and experience should have. and most importantly, their own emotions, that sentiment-based interpretation on how they're going to gravitate towards that. So that's a lens we use across the entire firm, and everything we design has to be based on that balance of place.
I love the point, Marcos, you made about people, because I think sometimes, I work in digital tech consulting. We talk about users, we talk about customers, and sometimes it is tempting to forget that they are humans. Like they're actually people who are interacting with things. And so we try not to take our own biases into that because we're all a sample size of one. But I do think thinking about how you as a human react to things is really, really critical, and thinking about what are people trying to accomplish in a space, right? So there's all of the other considerations. There's what's the brand trying to accomplish, what's maybe the artist trying to accomplish, but really coming back to, at the end of the day, it's a person that is arriving in a place who wants to do something. You want them to do something, which may or may not be the same thing. And how do you help them to be comfortable and relate? And I think sometimes we come up with ideas that sound amazing, but then you start to talk about like, hey, would any of y'all do that?
Well, just to add to that, a question we will often ask the folks that we're working with is directly, would you want to do that? Because just because you're the creatives or the people, the stakeholders, whoever, you're just another person at somebody else's activation tomorrow. And so it is a very valid, like, if you look at this and be like, well, that looks dumb, then it's probably dumb. Or like, God, can you imagine? Dumb. I can't believe people are going to do this. I'm like, well, they're probably not. And it's good to use yourself. You're a person too.
Totally.
100%.
To our social media team who are pulling the quotes to use on social media from each panel, please pull the one it's probably dumb. So at the end of the day, like, no matter what the project is, the goal at some like form is some type of audience engagement, right? So would you share some tips? Because I know each product or each project is different. So what are some tips in general that encourage audience engagement throughout an experience?
I think going to what we were just talking about, really thinking about how we meet the user where they are is really important. Understanding what's that point of entry, right? What's that thing that you're going to do that pulls the user in, that creates that invitation to engage. I think a lot of times we can miss the boat on that, right? Like we might have a good idea, but it's 2 or 3 steps down the path. So getting that initial engagement is really critical. I do a lot of boring commercial work, and it's like the customer is going to scan a QR code. Nope.
Yeah.
Try again. Or the customer is going to download an app.
No.
Right? So it's like, how do you create that right, very low friction entry point that a user can show up and start to experience it and then decide that they want to come and play, not like forcing too much of a commitment out of the gate.
Or earn the friction. Make the friction worthwhile. There's I used to work with this wonderful woman named Bernadette Castro, who was the daughter of Castro Convertibles. If you live in New York, you know Castro Convertibles. And she used to always ask us when we were helping them with some marketing stuff, she's like, I don't know, David, is the juice worth the squeeze? And it's like, again, like, it seems like silly, idiot little adages and stuff, but like, those are really important thoughts. Is it like, I hate activations that feel like a bait and switch, where it's like, here, come do this really cool thing, and at the end of it, you're like, why did I do all that? Where it's not a fair bargain, and that can be, really counterproductive to all the reasons why you did that thing in the first place.
Yeah, we often like to look at it from varying levels of engagement, right? So I mean, echoing what Jackie and David just said, yeah, once you have somebody enter to your experience, regardless of the place that it exists, you want to be able to slowly pull them in and be cognizant of where they want to participate and at what degree and level. So knowing that not everybody's going to be automatically engaged and want to participate, we often follow the same methodologies that you would for, a UX design perspective, where you have that initial state or that primary high level information based entry point that then turns into a secondary, more detailed state that somebody can participate, and then eventually tertiary information points. So the same way that you would pull somebody in from an online source or an activation, like Jackie, I'm sure is very familiar with, or the way that, maybe David and I would participate in an experience that's allowing somebody to interact or have something at a physical environment, you need to think that way. You need to think that not everybody's going to be at that same engagement level that you'd like them to be. So anything you can do to kind of slowly pull them in and give them options, I think can prove to be very effective in that as well.
Also, defining what do you mean by engagement, and what sort of engagement are you looking for? The type of engagement that I might be looking for in a retail setting might be very different than the type of engagement I'm looking for at a at a museum display or in an office lobby, and understanding what kind of engagement are you looking to generate is really important, because if the engagement you want is come and write something down on this thing and do these different things, that's a real high level of engagement that you're trying to move people towards. Whereas if the engagement is I want somebody to spend a little bit more time in a place, or I want somebody to walk away with a certain amount of information or a vibe, that's a different kind of engagement.
I think too, and this is maybe sounds overrated, but explaining to a customer, a user, a participant, what you want them to do, right? Like sometimes it's super obvious what you want them to do. Sometimes it's really not. I remember I was in a retail store playing with this experiential thing, and you put in your email address, and then it was very high-end luxury fashion, and then you pick a background, and then it just started rolling video, and there no explanation of what was happening. So we're, I'm there with a bunch of people. It's actually like a client tour we're doing. I'm standing there and we're like, is this a picture? Is it video? Like what am I supposed to do here? So we stood there awkwardly, and then it was like, congrats, and you could email yourself the video. And we were like, that was terrible. I don't know what just happened, right? Like I didn't know how to play because the rules were not clear. So really thinking about how do you set the right expectation? Everything is not always self-evident.
Yeah. And like also, what's the point of that? Like, what is the retail store getting out of that?
Email addresses.
Yeah. Oh, great. Love that.
And sometimes it's too obvious, right? Like if
the
customer can say like, oh, this was to get my data, even if you're not like a consultant, then you probably are doing the wrong thing.
And by the way, that's back to that bait and switch. We often will tell our clients, look, if the core purpose of this is to collect data, give them something that's worth them giving you their data. Yeah. Make them feel like this was a fair exchange, because, obviously we'll happily give up our data for all kinds of reasons, and whether we give it up or not, it's gone anyway, so it's sort of a moot point. But the feeling of it is what you can control. And so if it is going to be something where I want to get the data, then make it worth my while.
Yeah, and sometimes the biggest challenge is to help clients understand that their end users are not in the same mind state that they would like them to be, right? So I think that's both a challenge and maybe a blessing that we have as designers, is to help them kind of get to that aha moment when, maybe data collection wasn't the most important thing that they could achieve. Maybe a little bit of brand awareness and a little bit of engagement that can extend beyond that can be more effective. So I think that's probably one of the best tips that I would say, is find ways to sometimes make the client see things in a different light too.
Yeah. Good points all around. So a trend that's like kind of happening right now are these multi-sensory elements in experiences. So in what ways have you or would you balance these elements without completely overstimulating and overwhelming an audience?
I mean, sense the tricky one. And while it's a super powerful tool, it's super hard to control. But I think still important in the sense of, if you're mostly used to creating largely digital experiences, and now you're creating experiences out in the real world, which is where we spend most of our time. All five senses are engaged. Whether or not you're using them specifically is up to you. But they're all happening. And so, you know, that has that, you know, that comes, you know, and that starts to get into a lot of what Marcos and the folks in his world are dealing with, you know, in terms of, you know, how a physical space impacts all of that. And light and sound and, you know, walking into you know, I love walking spaces with architects and talking about, you know, the issues about echo and how we can change that, because that's going to change the way I feel in that space. And, you know, the light, the sound, and then when you get into real specific, you know, very specific experiences, obviously how you heighten or lower those becomes really important. But it's, you know, and it's why what I love most about doing experiential work is it forces interdisciplinary collaboration in a way that a lot of other kind of, I don't know, marketing / whatever this is that we do. It really, you have to bring these different, you know, professions and specialties together if you really want to make this thing work. It's not, no one's doing this on their own, at least not well.
Yeah, and if we think about, you know, the different senses, each one of them can send different types of stimulus to the brain. And when you have that combination, like David was saying, whether you like it or not, you're always reacting to all your senses. When you can use those in an experience, I mean, the possibilities are endless. You can actually transform experiences and transcend physical boundaries, right? So if we think about the best innovations and that we're seeing in spatial design and immersive technologies, to be able to apply that into a real physical environment by pulling on some of those heartstrings through the senses can be very powerful. So beyond just how can we complement a natural space, how can we transport somebody to be somewhere else, you know, and what are the cues that we can do to make it more believable and slowly have you be more immersed. And yeah, you know, I mean, the second part of your question, I think, was how do we do that without overwhelming the audience? So I think by delivering that slowly, right? So if you are going to use multiple senses, don't unleash them all at once. Like, you know, maybe start by sight because it's the most obvious, and then slowly add sound and other immersive features. I got a chance to go to the Sphere just last year for the first time, and I saw postcards from Earth. I don't know if anyone has seen it, but I mean, there's a whole orientation session at the beginning where you're about to unleash probably one of the most immersive experiences that anybody has witnessed in their life, and they don't just throw it on you, right? Like, I mean, they start with a smaller screen. The sound is coming from one point behind the screen only at a lower volume. And then as, you know, the piece progressed, they open it up. And even the narrative at the beginning has somebody climatizing to that environment, calming their breathing, and then slowly it unleashes.
And what I love is that everything, you know, everything old is new again. I remember going to the early IMAX screens, and there was this big opening sequence that was funded by Dolby, where they showed you the speakers behind the walls and where the different sound was going to come from. And it was the same thing. It was prepping you, getting you into the space. And not only did it get you, you know, sort of eased you into it, but it also, you know, and the same is true for the Sphere, it builds anticipation, and, you know, there's a lot of other stuff that you're getting from that.
Really good points. So what advice would you guys give to organizations who are looking to implement immersive experiences, particularly in terms of balancing that creativity and all of that artistry with practical considerations like budget and scalability and all of those other things that you have to take into account? It's a really hard question.
I love this question. I think the most creative ideas in my experience, and I lead a lot of ideation with clients, is what is the box that we're playing in, right? Like what is the space? What are the considerations? What are the must-haves? What are the limits, right? We're not all building rocket ships every time, right? So really understanding what those kind of foundational pieces are, and really understanding the purpose too, because I think that's a huge piece of figuring this out is, why are we doing it? What are we trying to get out of it? What's the type of the connection that we're trying to create? That like foundational understanding of the problem space is actually, I think, the most important thing that we can do. And often it's the piece that is least understood by our clients, right? They have a big idea, and the like, how do we shape, what are the limiting factors about this? How do we make this idea fit? Really important. My mom made fun of me a couple years ago. She said, "You're no fun at all. You always say no, it's not a good idea." And the offending statement was, why could we not build a water slide from the top of the garage into a 2-foot deep kiddie pool? And I was like, okay, first understand the limitations, right? So sometimes it can feel like you're being like no fun. Like, of course we should build a water slide, in the backyard. But I think actually, like, you can come up with different and better ideas by understanding that space.
Yeah, and like Jackie just commented, you just made me remember. I used to have an old CEO at a former firm that used to always say, "Don't ask Marcos because he'll ask you 100 questions before he gives you one answer," right? And I used to always take that as a compliment, because I think the advice I'll always give any client is you need to start with a sound strategy, right? To understand first and foremost, like Jackie was saying, who's your audience and what objectives do you even have for this experience? Then, what is that message or content that you're going to deliver that's actually going to even make that relevant and meaningful? And then start to think about, what's the optimal technology that can help deliver it, or, who's going to drive it, who's going to steer it, how are you going to update it? But if you don't start with that solid foundation on understanding the why, I think it's a real missed opportunity for a lot of clients. So that's always my number one.
The other thing I'll add, just from a pure practical production kind of side of things, is real world experiences take place in real world spaces. And if the physical space is a fixed thing, starting with understanding exactly what that space is and how it can do and what it can do. I can't tell you how many times, being able to be in a space then provides a lot of insights onto what's a good idea, what's a bad idea. It's a good way to start. You can get some basic budget concepts in your head because you've got so much space to fill. But those sorts of things are, important. And it's oftentimes, before we even get too far down the road, it's like, hey, we have this great idea. I'm like, where do you want to do it? And what does that look like? Because it's not the metaverse.
And I think so many clients are used to designing for this, right? Yeah. Like, this is what they're thinking about. And it's a very different mindset, right? Yep. And the reality of space is, I think, what makes our jobs really fun, and also what makes it challenging.
Yeah, that's an interesting hurdle to overcome too, Jackie, because I mean, like you mentioned people's mobile device. I mean, that's already a trusted advisor and counsel, right? You don't have to convince somebody to use their mobile device. I mean, most of the time you need to get people to stop using their mobile device, right? But in most of the spaces where we're playing, whether it's, an advertising mechanism to drive somebody in, or a physical environment to elevate experience, you're asking people to change their perception and their behavior to do something that they would normally not do or not want to do. So a completely different challenge. So the considerations that you sometimes have to get clients to think about can be quite different, right? Because it's not a mobile device and it's not a website. So yeah, that's a great point too.
So accessibility and inclusivity are also becoming really, really standard for installations, which is amazing. So how do you ensure that everyone can participate in an experience, especially when it is one that stimulates multiple senses?
Yeah, I think if we're designing for multiple senses, it's not just to provide engagement and allow people to feel more immersed. I think it's also so that we are cognizant of the fact that not all people can use all their senses, right? So by incorporating multiple senses into the equation, we can hope to achieve a larger audience, and that includes accessibility for people that, you know, possibly don't have sight or don't have the ability to hear. And beyond just physical accessibility, I think it's also important to consider even neurodivergent audiences, right? I know for us, especially when we're looking at workplace environments in particular, the biggest challenge for workplace right now is how do we make people want to come back to an office or to a physical environment? And what are the different things that we need to put throughout that experience so that they can feel more comfortable, so that they can feel included, so that they can feel valued? So, you know, things like including amenity spaces that can allow somebody to maybe decompress or, you know, have a place of quiet or relaxation or meditation. That's almost as important as providing a place that can be stimulating and uplifting, right? So I know in that context, I mean, we're constantly looking at accessibility and inclusivity, you know, to basically try and appeal for the masses and not treat it as an exception to what drives our experiences, right?
I think empathy can be underrated, right? Like just like really thinking about who are all the range of people that might have the experience, and how do we make sure that we're putting ourselves in their shoes. The other thing I think about is we do a lot of web accessibility work. And, you know, our accessibility team always reminds us that there's kind of this orientation toward accessibility in the design world where it's like accessibility is a limiter, right? Like I can't do the things that I want to do that are big ideas because I have to limit because of accessibility. But what they're reminding us increasingly is accessible experiences are good design for everyone. It makes your design better, right? It's not about this limiting factor. It's actually, you know, if you make it good for everyone, you make it good for everyone. And that applies broadly.
Yeah, and ultimately we're trying to get the highest level of response or engagement, not always engagement, but response from our audiences depending on the experience, right? So the more that we can make that accessible to everyone, then the more likely we're going to achieve that objective. It's kind of a simple way to look at it, but I mean, it makes sense, right?
So when we're thinking about leveraging audience data, are we looking into this kind of new realm of even being able to leverage audience feedback in real time to be able to like refine and improve anything, or are we like not there yet in terms of technology and capability?
We always ask clients, what do they want the data for? Data's like is sort of falsely seductive. It feels really important. I can put it onto an Excel sheet. I can show it to people. I can sort it. I can organize it. I can put it up against the KPI. But in, 20 years now of designing experiences and activations, not one time have we had a client come to us and say, hey, we'd like to design this new experience. Here's some data from our previous experience, which you might find useful in this design. Not one time, which is, they probably collected a bunch of data. So I do think that the whole data, collecting data, you really want to make sure you've got a need for it and a purpose for it and a use for it, and that you're going to do something with it, because it can be an unnecessary expense. It can be an obstacle to engagement. It can make people feel uncomfortable. There are good ways and bad ways to do it, but it's, you probably don't need their email address. But if you have a real specific reason, great, let's use that. But yeah, we can collect so much data now. Like, it's stupid how much data we can collect. But what are you going to do with it? And is it really important? And is it actionable? And if so, then let's build around that. Let's use it.
Yeah, I think.
Go ahead, Mom.
No, go ahead, Jen.
I was going to say, I think this question is the biggest, like, it depends is the answer.
Right.
Like, I'm doing work right now with a quick serve restaurant brand, and we are doing AI-driven merchandising. So we are absolutely looking at what do we show a customer, what do they do, what do they buy, what's working well, what's not working well, and literally feeding it back into a model, right? So it's like very much, yes, there's a continuous feedback loop, and the experience is absolutely, definitely changing over time. It's designed for that. Now, if I build a giant immersive brand experience in a lobby, what is the usefulness of user feedback and how might I incorporate that, right? And I think we just need to be realistic about that question, right? And intentional.
Yep.
David's right. You can over design for data collection, and it becomes like this big digital wastebasket. We want to avoid that.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a distinction too between data and feedback, right? Because I mean, data can be generalized based on a large focus group of similar type participants and personas. And the way you interpret that data is often generalized, especially if you're going to use automated tools to do that. I mean, if you think about the lack of being able to rationalize exceptions to those personas when you're doing it with humans and research groups, as advanced as technology is and AI is and being able to interpret things, it's only as good as the data set that's been programming it and its ability to compute and rationalize that behavior, right? But feedback, on the other hand, is something that I think all three of us are closer to in the experiences that we create. If we provide ways for users to provide you with quick, simple feedback or choice or selection that can then steer and guide that experience, then it becomes more personal to them. And then immediately you're able to help them kind of choose their own adventure as they're using your experience. That's going to prove to be a lot more beneficial and allow people to drive it. So it's kind of a loaded question, right? Because you said data and feedback and refine and real time, right? Because each one of those is a different variable to that.
Yeah.
So, I think being able to help clients understand how much of that is really most important, like David was saying, can help us find different ways and solutions to provide a personal reaction, which we can all aim.
Marcus, I really like your distinction, because when we're talking about experience sometimes, we'll talk about things that are responsive versus things that are interactive. And the distinction that we make in those is the simplest. One of my favorite things we did was we had created this specialized clothing rack that the closer you got to it, it glowed more and more golden.
Ooh.
Backed away, it faded away, and it was like the world's simplest proximity sensor and some LED lights. It was great, and that's just a very responsive thing. And sometimes a reactive wall or something like that, where it's going to respond to things that are happening in the environment around it that you are triggering sort of passively. You can then engage on a secondary level and manipulate that trigger, but that's different from something that's interactive, where I'm being asked to initiate or decide something. Like my favorite interactive display in the world is a giant red button, because like it's you're never going to not press that button, and everyone knows what to do, and it's great. But that's an interactive display versus a responsive display. And when you talk about data and sensors, and there's so many things in an immersive experience that we can do with, honestly, I know everyone likes the latest technology, but mostly with like really simple old school sensors and things, to make that place feel responsive to people. And that's super powerful. And that kind of real time, interactive, responsive design, I think, is super powerful and super engaging.
It's also the distinction between implicit and explicit, right?
Yeah.
Like you're taking signals, implicit signals from the people in the space. You're not asking them to do anything, but you're making their experience better along the way, versus explicit. I need you, customer, to do something so that I can respond to you in a meaningful way. And I think being really balanced in your approach to both implicit and explicit inputs is an important way to frame that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, David, you mentioned the big red button, and I don't know why my brain went this way. Maybe it's just the way I'm wired, but it made me think of the red pill in the Matrix and the blue pill in the Matrix, right? So talk about the ultimate choice selection for a user to basically choose the rest of their story and their narrative, right? So even something as simple as 2 pathways that lead you into different experiences is enough to actually shape something in real time. So
I'd also say that sometimes we find that folks will get, and again, it's very specific. Again, this is a very situational kind of thing. But sometimes people get a little too obsessed with personalizing, as opposed to understanding that people are, we largely react to things kind of similar. We're not, like, in a lot of ways, we're not that different. And sometimes it's about a universal feeling or a collective nature of an experience versus overly personalizing or trying to personalize something, and more making it, humans are humans, and here we go. Nobody personalizes a roller coaster ride. We all get on at the beginning, we take the ride, and we get up at the end. And it's great. It's real fun. And I don't think people are looking for little buttons they can push to spin off something off the ride. But there are other times when that's a really wonderful option, and to choose that pathway. So that balancing act, again, I think is really important.
And David just invented the choose your own adventure roller coaster.
Yeah.
For those who are paying attention.
I've been wanting to get it. My dream is like in some alternate life, I just want to be working in one of those places that only makes dark rides. That sounds like the best job. What a fun world.
Or like being able to pick like how loopy do you want it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
How many
Yeah.
times would you like to be upside down? 0.
Yeah.
Okay, you're just gonna go in a straight line.
Yeah.
So we did get a question in from the audience that I thought was interesting. So I'm just going to throw it to you guys. This is from Paul. Paul asked, like, at what point are we pushing audience members into an experience so much that we might actually be alienating them, particularly in retail, where sometimes people just want to shop. They don't want to do all that. They just want to buy their stuff and get out. And he was like, what will it take to kind of keep this balance? Is it going to require legislation, or what do you guys think?
So I'll take the first stab at that, since I have retail in my job. I think so much of this is about how do we create the right optionality for customers, right? How do we let them choose how they want to interact with us? So, I think there's a big push again toward mobile devices. Everything should be on the mobile device. The problem with that is, when customers are in your stores, what you generally find out if you actually ask them, they're not using your app in their store the way you want them to, right? They're doing other stuff. They're checking their email. They're texting their husband to find out whether there's milk in the fridge. They're doing all these other things. They're not in your app doing the thing you wanted them to do. But we want to make sure that they want to be heads up. And so how do you meet them where they are? And I have multiple pathways to get the same information. Right? Maybe the tag on the shelf is enough. I don't need more than that. That's all I want. Maybe I do want to scan a QR code and get more information on my personal device, and I want to browse that in my own space. Maybe I do want to play with a big interactive thing on the wall. I really think, you guys can quote me on this one, that the store of the future is frictionless, right? That's where we're headed in retail. It's about frictionless. And that means creating the right opportunities for customers to opt in or opt out in a way that makes sense for them, that they feel comfortable and happy in the environment. So I would think about it that way. I don't think, does it require legislation to limit? I don't think so, right? It's like you can walk by, you can choose to opt out, right, with your own actions. So I don't know.
Also say, the sort of not to just pick fights, but I think on some level the frictionless thing is great, but I think we also some of us go shopping because we want the friction, and the friction being the interaction and the larger experiences and the because if I truly wanted it frictionless, I'd just do it on my computer, and that's super frictionless, but I think to your point, the various pathways is super important, and having different ways that I can have, back to choose your own adventure, right? But it's not as obvious maybe, but having different ways people can come in and experience a store, I think is super powerful.
David, we can talk for an hour on the differences between digital experience and physical experience.
Yeah.
Well, and you know what? Even in a shopping context, taking digital completely out of the equation, I think about IKEA as an example, right? I mean, they are the number one location that I can think of that takes you on a programmed, guided journey to try and show you narrative storytelling in different environments and how that can live and your different portions of your home that you could design. But they also do give you little escape routes down the sides that if you want to bypass an entire area, you can take, or if you want to just be on the lower level and go right to the racks and pick up your item, you don't have to go through that whole experiential journey, right? So technology aside, I think retailers that do it effectively, to Jackie's point, provide you multiple ways to browse and shop and engage. And I think, the user who prompted the question, I would say if the way that you like to shop is immediate, quick, easy, frictionless, get in, get out, it's representative of a lot of people that want to shop that way. But at the same time, there's different people that choose to build brand affinity with a particular place where they want to shop. And they want to know that if they're going to buy something from this brand, it's because they want to buy into the culture, the community mindset, or maybe even just feel that they share common values that this brand wants to achieve. A lot of those things are hard to tell if you're just limiting yourself to traditional merchandising and price points and signs and quick in and out entry, right? So I think a lot of it depends too on the type of brand and the type of location and what the stories are that they need to tell. And most importantly, I think like we've been saying with every single question is who is that end user and what do they want and how can the experience be personalized and catered to reach them?
I think it circles back around to some of our previous topics too. Like accessibility is a big one, right? Like how are you thinking about different types of customers with different capabilities? I always use the my dad test, right? Like my dad would rather, I don't know what, than order from a kiosk, right? Yep. But now you go to McDonald's, you go to Taco Bell, like they want you to use that kiosk. And if you don't want to use the kiosk, you have a little bit of a problem, right? Doesn't like that, right?
No.
It also goes back to like, who is your customer and what are they willing to do? I had a conversation with a B2B client once. They have these warehouses, right? And they said one of their biggest things they wanted to work on is self-service. And I said, okay, like what would your customers do? Like what would be the self-service activities that they would engage in? And they sort of looked at me and I said, like, are they coming because they want the help of your associate to help them navigate the catalog? Or are they coming, like, why are they coming? And I could tell they had not even thought about it for a second, right? Like, well, self-service is good for us. So of course it's good for the customer. And I think that's where things start to really break.
Yeah. Good points all around. I did want to ask if, in your opinions, there is a perfect balance of use of cutting edge technology with those timeless storytelling principles to create the ultimate like lasting impact. I feel like that's another loaded question.
Well, I think storytelling and narrative in general is always really powerful as a tool. And also using sort of the general, principles around, looking at those as foundational sort of frameworks for certain kinds of experiences, whether it's, thinking about the hero's journey or, the way that, the way that we deliver, makes a good story satisfying. Is that, how I went through that process? And am I delivering, a moral or message at the end? Is there all those kind of traditional storytelling, devices? Because again, that goes back to the, universality of people. When you read the fairy tales of different cultures, for kids, they're almost all the same. It's different characters, different settings, but again, like how we respond to story is a super universal thing. And it can be a really great, key to unlocking certain experiences.
Yeah, and maybe it's just a matter of reprioritizing some of those objectives, right? I think, we were talking about the beginning about thinking how people come together with other people, right, as human beings. And if we look as that being the guiding principle for how we're going to design an experience around it, the technology could be a lot more simplified, or the experience that we're designing or the content that needs to be created could also be a lot more simplified in the interest of just finding a way to allow people to connect a little bit closer. So I think maybe designing for connection being the primary objective can help us reevaluate some of that thinking, and can maybe also even overcome some of the challenges that we might face as designers that typically could be budget, time. So, it can work in our favor as well.
I think the question is always, is the tech getting in the way, or could the tech potentially get in the way? And if the answer is yes to either of those questions, we really need to think hard. I'm going to pick on my local museum. I live in Houston. Museum of Natural Science in Houston just unveiled this huge exhibit about matter. It's fascinating. It's a great exhibit. Half of the stuff, and I don't know who designed it, so I'm sorry if I'm offending anybody who's listening to this, although this is feedback if you are. Half of the content in the exhibit is behind like hand gestural controls, like haptic. None of it works. I cannot get to half of the content in the exhibit. My son and I were so frustrated. We were trying to scroll through. It had, great alchemists of history, right? And it was a timeline. And instead of just like, oh my God, can you just drag it or like push a button? It's this haptic thing. You have to grab the scroll and pull it across. Forget about it. We couldn't even use it. We gave up. And so to me, I in this profession, I was sad as a user, but I was really sad as a practitioner, because I was thinking about how, we have these tools in our toolbox, but when they don't work right, our execution can be severely impacted. It's the kind of thing that I'm sure people will tout as like this amazing exhibit, an amazing case study. And then for anyone who actually goes and tries to use it, like, that sucks, right? And I think that's something to just really be thoughtful about. Are we using technology because it's cool, or are we using technology because it actually helps? And if we are using technology in a way that if it breaks, it ruins the experience, think twice, think three times about that.
A lot of it can be too using technology before it's reached its maturity and ability to respond the way that you want. And I haven't been to that experience, but I have worked with a lot of gesture experiences over the years. And I remember at the beginning, I used to avoid them like the plague because they never worked properly. But now, as depth sensor cameras that can use skeletal tracking to allow you to move things, are a lot more precise to allow some of that gesture control to happen. Those types of experiences that maybe we were looking at, 10, 12 years ago that sucked, now actually become more effective. And you mentioned haptic control, and I think more sophisticated gestures like, grabbing and pulling. Those are really cool. I mean, I've played around with them, but some of them might not be quite ready. And a lot of times the tech that gets purchased and deployed does not really match the desired outcomes of what was possible from that type of control.
We get a lot of requests for interactive walls, motion walls, in a lot of built environments. And one of the things that's really important that we explain to folks is like, that cool thing you showed me on YouTube, go back and look at it. That is a single person in a clean environment, or it's two people in a clean environment, properly spaced, in the right spot, well lit, and understanding how these technologies behave in different environments and which technologies to deploy in different environments. So, if when we play with like responsive walls, or somebody wants an interactive wall in a busy space, I move away from camera technology completely, even though, yeah, I can do skeletal tracking up to a point, and I can do maybe 6 bodies. But what happens when that 7th body comes in? Or when people decide to piggyback on each other, or all the things people do because they refuse to behave the way you want them to. And or how do you design the space to engender the behavior that you need? Do you put spots on the floor? Stand here. Do you create a hall where only one person passes at a time? You know, all of that stuff's really important. I think a lot of what we see, and it's, you know, at some point I should just put up a little like post of them. There's like the 25 videos we get sent every year. We want to do this, and the sort of the truth and the fallacy behind each of them, because, you know, obviously the people making a lot of this great new technology, and it's awesome and it's what we love to play with, but when to deploy it or if to deploy it is you know, we always tell people, you don't really want the next new thing, you want the thing right before that works really well every time. And, you know, especially in a built environment situation, when we're doing events, we have a little more freedom. I've got my tech, I've got the wizard behind the curtain, and it's got to work for 8 hours, and, you know, I've got 2 more backups on the truck, and we're gonna make it. Versus I'm gonna leave this here, and you know, good luck to you and your poor store manager when this thing doesn't work anymore. And so, you know, that's the other part. Like, one of the things we found in retail, especially that's been a learning curve for us coming out doing other stuff, is retail doesn't have a grand experiential AV infrastructure to lean on. You know, there's a, you know, in some cases there's a store manager, and then there's a guy they can call. And so if that thing can't be solved by turning it off and turning it back on again, it can't go into that store. You know, that kind of stuff is really important. And same thing, seen so many things that could have been a cool experience that are just either not working, or were too hard for the store to manage, so they just let it fall into disrepair. You know, yeah, it sucks.
Yeah, a lot of it is just jumping on technology for the sake of technology, right? And I think that's where clients fail, because they're not really doing a service to their users by thinking that way, right? And if we think about, you know, technology before it reaches its maturity, the number one example of that being rushed right now is AI, right? Everybody wants to just incorporate AI into everything just so that they can say, we're using AI. But there's few firms that are actually adopting it well and rolling it out. One that I like to celebrate is Adobe, and how they're integrating AI as part of the design tools and putting it in the hands of skilled designers so that they can actually use it as part of the workflow, and not before it's become possible to actually achieve the end success with it. So I think that's another really big part of it as well.
We make a sticker that says "Now with AI" inside, and you can pop it on anything you want. You sell them for $5 each, and they pretty much do the job.
Off the shelf. I think the one, and maybe this is the closing point before we beat the dead horse. Having something that's broken is much, much worse than having nothing. Right. So I think that's really the other piece of this. Like David is talking about, you know, there's only the one guy. If you can't reboot it and it fixes itself after 30 seconds of being off, it's not a good call. Hit me really hard, because it is like you get stuff and shit breaks. That is a guarantee. And when something is sitting in an environment and you have customers going by it, trying to use it, seeing it, wondering what it was, it's a way worse experience. It really is.
So, in the name of that, do you guys have any predictions on the next big trend in creating immersive experiences? Yeah, just put some AI in it. It'll be great.
Yeah.
I think you know, finding ways to deliver physical environments that give you all the benefits of a virtual world, but in a place where you can come together with other people and other humans, I think is the ultimate objective for an immersive experience. So lots of technologies helping us achieve it. One that I'm really close to and constantly trying to incorporate is transparent display technology as it evolves, and how it can be a layer to help augment space the same way that we might in XR worlds. So that's one. David, tag, you're it.
Yeah. I think there's I love a lot of the transparent stuff. We're actually getting one of those HoloConnect boxes in here to play with next week. That'll be fun. You know, I don't think there's any major sort of grand hardware or technology thing that's going to be the next big thing. There's one, the LED costs coming down, projectors being an actual reliable tool now, not these crazy lamp-based jet engines. We love, projection mapping was sort of like the first thing we learned how to do, and it's still one of our favorite things to do. It's just a wonderful way to create illusion, and people like to feel illusions. But I do think if we're talking about immersive, sort of the evolution of immersive attractions, like the whole, Atelier Lumières and the Van Goghs and things, I think really in the Arctech houses and all those, I think really the next evolution in that is story and narrative and building richer experiences within those that can be more than just sort of the eye candy factor of it. And I see a lot of that already starting to happen. But also, I just think, as we were just on the call with a financial services company that just put these two gigantic screens into their lobby, and now they're going to have to become experiential because you can't put a giant screen in your lobby like that and then just pretend it's not there. And I think that's happening. The built environment is bringing more and more of these, more and more AV into it. And therefore becoming more immersive and becoming more experiential, and you're going to have to design for that and support for that and strategize for that and make that work.
And I think from my perspective, and I tend to do more commercial, boring projects than our friends here. It's just really like realizing the promise of omni-channel. I think there's a ton of potential. I talk about, we have all these companies we work with. They talk about omni-channel experience. We've been talking about it for 15 years. It's cliche. That's how much we talk about omni-channel, and everyone forgot to do it. Right? Like, they exclude store. They exclude their physical space from omni-channel. So I think we are at a moment of reckoning where it is actually about how do you bring the digital and physical together? How do you think about the digitally enabled customer, the digitally enabled associate, and make sure that we're building the right spaces for them to meet and use the tools in productive ways. So I am personally super excited for that. We keep saying next year is going to be the year of the store. Maybe next year will be the year of the store. I'm optimistic. But I think for me, that is really like the next frontier. Let's live up to the promise, guys.
Yes, but if one more person has the audacity to post that in-store retail is dead, just please stop. Enough. People love to shop. We're not going to stop shopping. People want to go to stores. They want to be out there. I'm so tired of that narrative.
That's no one's ever going to stop me going to Target. I'll tell you that.
Like, you want to spend an extra $200 every time you shop Target.
if Target wanted me to do that, then that is fine. Like, yeah, there are certain, yeah, I agree. No one's ever going to completely stop going into stores because going into stores is half the fun, most of the fun.
It should be fun. Shopping is an experience. If you look at the history of retail shopping and the things that we look at as touchstones, and the opening of Selfridges and Macy's, and shopping was and is still and should be. It's a thing we do as a social. It's something to do. Mm-hmm. We need experience. Mm-hmm. We want to go out and do things, and if we get something along the way, great. We don't even always. It's okay if we don't, but we're out there, and it's a big part of our day-to-day lives, and it's silly to keep thinking that we're just going to stop doing that.
Yeah. All right, so we've got about 4 minutes left, so I did want to go around and just have each of you give me just a couple of closing comments, final thoughts that you want the audience members to take away having watched this today. Jackie, do you want to start?
I will start. That means I'm not last. I think, we talked a lot about people in this hour, right? And really being useful and being thoughtful and being empathetic to the people that we're designing experiences for. And that includes both the people who are going to play with the thing in the field. And it also means for our clients and helping them, right? I think my job is consultant, right? So I understand the value of consulting. I think sometimes we forget how valuable consulting is. Our clients need it. They don't have the expertise to do these things themselves. They saw the video on YouTube. They have no freaking idea how it's going to come to life, but you know, right? So I think the client is not always right. Like, we have way past the days of the client is always right. I think the client is usually wrong, right? And it's about, how do we help them to do better? How do we help them do better for their customers? And how do we help our fellow people have better, more fun experiences in the world? If you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong.
Amazing. Marcos, what do you got?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what Jackie just said, I echo 100%. Maybe one thing that we can add to that equation is helping clients achieve some alignment, even internally throughout their various stakeholders and organizations. That's probably one of the greatest gifts I think that we can bring forward as designers, is sometimes just helping clients overcome their own misconceptions or unalignments that they have between different stakeholders, because ultimately who's going to suffer is the end user and the end client, who's the one that's most important to all of us. So really starting with that strategy that Jackie's talking about as consultants to help them get to that final goal, I think is key. So I would say any clients listening, listen to your designers. They know what they're doing.
Last but not least, David.
I guess a little, just sort of another sort of takeaway to think about is, immersive doesn't mean huge, and immersive doesn't have to be all encompassing, and immersive doesn't mean, that Van Gogh exhibit, that immersive experiences, we're always immersed, we're always in things, and it's you can do very small things that have huge impacts, and there's all kinds of ways to think about immersive experience and experience design as part of how you're achieving those other, whatever your objectives are with your company or your store or your event or whatever that is. But the idea of immersive is this idea of just engaging with people in a real world experience, and it doesn't have to be gigantic. There's lots of little things you can do as well that can be really important.
That's amazing. So my actual final question I'm going to ask each of you is to go around and say, where can people reach you? So Jackie, if anyone has any questions or would like to find out more about you or what you do, where can they go?
Yeah, so you can hit me on LinkedIn, Jackie Walker. My URL is very confusingly Jackie O'Hare, because I used to be a not married person. Or jackie.walker@publicissapient.com. The easiest to spell email ever.
Marcos, what about you?
Same. You can reach me on LinkedIn. My name's always the same, never changed. So Marcos Terenzio. And you can also email me at m.terenzio@interiorarchitects.com.
Perfect. And David, what about you?
I'm always a fun little follow on LinkedIn, and I like to chat with folks. And David@bravomedia.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. This has genuinely been one of the best panels I think I've ever had the honor of moderating. So you guys have been so fantastic.
Every panel.
I actually have never said that before, ever. And Carrie, who is our producer, is gonna nod because she can quote me on that. Yeah, I've never said that before. You guys have been so fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm gonna bring on Megan.
Thanks all.